During the horrors of the air raids of the London Blitz of World War II, if that wasn't enough, there was another equally sinister wave that hit the capital. Wartime conditions provided fertile ground for various illicit activities, as black marketeers, thieves, and looters took advantage of the misfortunes of war. Beyond immediate looting from the rubble, widespread rationing and a blackout fostered a booming trade for food and clothing. With roughly 1 million homes destroyed or damaged during the Blitz in London, criminals stalked the streets with seeming impunity, stealing valuables from the ruins of shattered homes. The problem was surprisingly widespread, with thieves capitalizing on the chaos, blackouts, and evacuated properties, with official records showing thousands of offences with opportunistic theft from bombed-out homes and the grim stripping of valuables from casualties in destroyed night spots, all being a treasure trove for looters. In some cases, even air raid wardens were accused of using their positions to engage in theft. One common ruse was for thieves to kit themselves out with a warden's helmet and armband and smash their way into shops when no one was looking. Such was the power of the armband that the well-meaning public would dutifully help load up a car with the saved goods, believing that they were being removed for safe keeping. Some unscrupulous villains even used vehicles disguised as ambulances for their getaways. But not all were professional criminals. Alarming numbers of home defence forces, including auxiliary firemen and even members of the public, took advantage of unguarded ruins to steal surviving furniture and carpets from bombed-out families. After an air raid on Dover, one man returned home to find his entire house stripped. Even the carpets and pipework had been taken by opportunistic thieves. During the first 4 months of the Blitz alone, 4,584 cases of looting were prosecuted at the Old Bailey. The first people to be liberated by Britain in the Second World War were criminals. As the declaration of hostilities was announced in 1939, the gates of the country's prisons swung open for any inmate with less than 3 months left to serve. One of the first lucky ones to pick up a get-out-of-jail-free card was Billy Hill, a well-dressed thief from Seven Dials in London, who had eventually emerged from the war as a leading figure in the capital's underworld. He immediately appreciated what a great opportunity the war presented. He said that so big and so profitable was the black market that it walked into my ever-open arms. It was the most fantastical side of civilian life in wartime. Overall, it cost the British taxpayer many millions of pounds. Hill also realised that the departure of so many young men to the war effort would soon lead to a weakened police force, as indeed it did. His gang established a dominant position in the black market, as well as carrying out a host of large robberies and burglaries. These included a string of spectacular smash and grab raids on some of London's best-known jewellery shops, including one in which they smashed their way in with a stolen car into Carrington's in Regent Street and made off with £6,000 worth of goods. Within weeks of wartime rationing being introduced, he was selling everything from whiskey to sausages at a huge profit. He emerged from the war a wealthy man. Gangs, too, controlled the thriving vice business, although Hill left it to others. The kingpins of wartime vice were 5 Maltese brothers, the Messinas. By 1944, there were over 3 million men in the home armed forces and over 1.5 million American troops. Sailors, soldiers, and airmen would surge into town on leave, looking for a good time. The Messinas were happy to provide it. They owned nightclubs, brothels, and ran a huge team of prostitutes known as the Piccadilly Commandos. While it was predictable that professional criminals should seek to profit from the Blitz and the blackout, what was more surprising was how many others joined in. Rationing, introduced for food and luxury items, led to widespread abuse by people who would never have considered themselves lawbreakers. In 1943, in one operation, 5 million clothing coupons were stolen, and the government had to cancel the entire issue. By 1945, more than 114,000 prosecutions for black market activities had taken place, sometimes for remarkably minor and understandable breaches of the law. Most law-abiding people found looting despicable, and examples differentiated between stealing someone's property and spotting a wireless or jewelry lying on the pavement after an air raid and reckoning that, if you don't take it, someone else would, as looting became a rather elastic term. There is a story about a rescue party going to a pub and having to dig for bodies, a very grisly task. The leader of the group found a bottle of brandy and passed it round between his men to have a swig to stiffen their nerves, and was actually sentenced to 6 months in prison as a result. One trader in East London at the beginning of 1941 reckoned that shopkeepers lost more from crime than they did from the German bombs. When the Café de Paris, which had a supposedly secure underground ballroom, suffered a direct hit, rescuers were shocked to find that looters were among them, yanking brooches and rings from the bodies of the dead and injured revellers. "Hang a looter and stop this filthy crime," headlined the Daily Mirror in November 1940. There was little the police could do to protect wrecked shops, whose smashed windows were often only replaced with cardboard or plywood. Police cars were subject to the same petrol shortages as everyone else, and pursuits during the blackout were almost impossible. One officer recalled spotting 3 men breaking into a clothes shop to steal suits and dressing gowns. Clothing was rationed, and to buy a suit, you needed a large amount of coupons. If you could acquire some, you did very well. Some crimes were related purely to the war. Doctors took bribes to sign people off as unfit to be in the armed services. Patients with some ailment would, for up to £150 a time, assume the identity of someone who had received call-up papers and attend the medical on their behalf, ensuring that they were excused. Another scam came into play after every Luftwaffe raid. The government paid £500 to those who had lost their homes through the bombing, plus additional compensation for damaged furniture and clothing. One enterprising chap, Walter Handy, claimed to have been bombed out 19 times in a 5-month period. His luck eventually ran out, and he was jailed for 3 years. The blackout was also the pickpocket's best friend. People with less scruples found wartime bonanza for crime were legitimate businessmen who realized that they could charge the government pretty much what they wanted for vital services. The war was regarded by many businesses as an entrepreneurial opportunity, as the government was seen by many as fair game for fraud. In some cases, all kinds of non-existent workers would be put on the payroll. The crime rate increased by 57% from 1939 to 1945, but there was never the descent into the kind of civilian lawlessness that has characterized so many other wars over the past century. Perhaps with a view to the importance of morale, no one was actually executed for looting, and most were given hefty fines or shorter sentences. There are also cases of murderers hiding their victims in damaged buildings due to the bombing, providing the perfect place to hide a body. It was likely that the death would be blamed on the air raid, and therefore would not arouse suspicion and require further investigation. The bleak darkness of the blackout, air raids, and confusion widened their opportunities. When the bodies were discovered, it was assumed they had been in the house when the bomb hit. A serial killer who became known as the Blackout Ripper took advantage of the cover of darkness and murdered at least 4 women during the blackouts in London. He was a young airman from the RAF named Gordon Cummins. He liked mutilating and murdering young women. The dark, unlit streets of London afforded him good cover. He was caught thanks to his fingerprints being found on a gas mask left behind at the scene of an attempted murder. Cummins had no previous history of crime or violence. In February 1942, he was accused of murdering Evelyn Oatley, Margaret Lowe, Doris Duanay, and Evelyn Hamilton, and attempting to strangle Greta Hayward around the West End. While attacking Greta, he was disturbed by a delivery boy and fled, leaving behind his RAF bag. He was tried at the Old Bailey, where the jury found him guilty of Oatley's murder after just 35 minutes. He was hanged at Wandsworth Prison on the 25th of June, 1942. As well as stories of heroism, newspapers were filled with reports of crime. Another London murderer, Harry Dobkins, tried to take advantage of the wreckage of the Blitz to cover up his crime. He realized that so many people were killed in air raids that it was impossible for the police to investigate every death. Victims were buried quickly, and very few post-mortems were carried out. On July the 17th, 1942, a workman who was helping to demolish the badly bomb-damaged Vauxhall Baptist Chapel in Vauxhall Road prized up a stone slab and found beneath it a mummified body. The immediate assumption was that the remains were either of an air raid victim or had come from the old burial ground underneath the church. When the place had been bombed on the 15th of October 1940, more than 100 people had been killed in the conflagration, and the area around the chapel had been the target of a number of air raids between that time and March 1941. It was immediately suspected that it was foul play. In trying to recover the body, the skull had become detached, and the police realized that the head had already been cut from the body. Also, the limbs had been severed at the elbows and knees. Flesh had been removed from the face. The lower jaw was missing. The body was coated in builder's lime. The police came to the conclusion that the murderer had done this to destroy the body. However, he had obviously not known the difference between quicklime and builder's lime, which actually helped to preserve the body. It was an obvious attempt that had been made to disguise the identity of the corpse. Time of death was estimated at between 12 and 15 months prior to discovery. Meanwhile, the police had been checking the lists of missing persons and noted that 15 months previously, Mrs. Rachel Dobkin, a strange wife of Harry Dobkin, the fire watcher at the firm of solicitors next door to the Baptist Chapel at 302 Vauxhall Road, had disappeared. Rachel Dubinsky had married Harry Dobkins in September 1920, and soon after a baby boy was born. But after 3 years, the couple had separated. In 1923, Mrs. Dobkin obtained a maintenance order obliging her husband to pay for the upkeep of their child. Dobkin was always a spasmodic payer, and over the years had been imprisoned several times for defaulting on the payments. Mrs. Dobkin had also unsuccessfully summoned him 4 times for assault. She habitually pestered him in the street to get her money, and was still demanding cash in 1941, when their child was 20 years old and hardly a dependent. It was later claimed that she was also blackmailing him over some undisclosed indiscretion at work. The trial of Mr. Dobkin opened at the Old Bailey on the 17th of November 1942. The prisoner's appearance in the witness box left the jury unimpressed. and it took them only 20 minutes to arrive at a verdict of guilty. Before his execution, he confessed to his wife's murder, claiming that she was always pestering him for money and he wanted to be rid of her for good. On the 7th of January 1943, Harry Dobkin was hanged behind the walls of Wandsworth Prison. This case raised the issue of how many people had been murdered during the war and been successfully buried in the rubble of bombed-out buildings. One is bound to wonder how many wartime murderers disposed of bodies in a similar way, but got away with it. Many items were rationed during the war, the major ones being food, petrol, and clothing. Rations were administered via a system of ration books and coupons, and it offered a golden opportunity for forgers and thieves. Huge amounts of money could be made. In one case in 1944, a gang stole 14,000 newly issued ration books and sold them on the black market for a total estimated profit of £70,000. Another case featured the forgery of clothing coupons. The going black market rate for a forged coupon was £10 at the time, and a large number of these were sold on the streets of London. Other scams were operated by crooked officials and professionals. Corrupt council officials were involved in a dreadful case in Hammersmith, when some badly built air raid shelters collapsed in a bombing raid, and many died. Investigations disclosed a record of bribery and use of substandard materials by contractors. Others even looted while air raids were taking place. At the height of the air raid on Coventry in November 1940, 2 men were caught ransacking a wine merchant's. I cannot think of conduct more detestable than that. During the most dreadful air raid which has ever taken place, you should be found looting, the judge told them, as he jailed them for 6 and 7 years respectively. In Kensington, West London, a gardener was caught removing rings from 4 dead bodies in January 1941, while on one day in November 1940, 20 of the 56 cases at the Old Bailey were looters. 10 of them were auxiliary firemen. The government was so concerned about looting, it brought in the death penalty and life sentences as a deterrent. However, perhaps with a view to the importance of morale, no one was actually executed for looting, and most were given heavy fines or short prison sentences.